All right, so welcome everybody. Again, my name is Jill Patton. As people are rolling in, I want to make sure I say hi to you and let you know who I am. I'm the host of the Health Exchange and a health and wellness coach. And this is Sarah Kucera. Sarah is a chiropractor. She's an Ayurvedic practitioner, a stellar yoga teacher, and the author of 2 books in Ayurveda. Oh, I was going to grab my books over there. I have one of them, the Ayurvedic Self-Care Handbook, which is really lovely. And the one I haven't seen yet is the 7 Ways of Ayurveda, which I will be getting my hands on. And Sarah's in Kansas City. And I know Sarah, I've known Sarah for about 15 years. When I did my yoga teacher training in 2008, we think that was, Sarah taught the anatomy and physiology portion of that program. And she's just a really cool person. And I'm excited to talk with you. So Sarah.
I think you're cool too.
What's that?
I think you're cool too.
Oh, thanks. So welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for coming. Thanks for having this conversation with me.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I like to start each Healthy Exchange with the same question for all of my guests, which is, interpreted however you like to, because it's sort of open-ended, but like, what does health and wellness mean for you?
So I definitely subscribe to the idea of health being multidimensional, involving not just physical health and mental health, but also social, spiritual, our community, and so forth. But truly at the heart of all of that is, for me, really when I'm connected with my truest self, or when I'm feeling most like myself. That's when I know. I mean, even if I would have sort of a health imbalance, I still would consider that to be like a state of health. When I say imbalance, I mean something that's very small and like manageable.
Right.
So that I can like health is also understanding when you're not healthy as well.
Well, self-awareness.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just talking to a client this week who was saying that she just wanted to move through her life feeling like herself. And so when do you feel like you? And it sounds like you're saying, like, when you're feeling healthy in these multidimensional ways is when you feel like you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And tapped into, like, as you mentioned, self-awareness, like using self-awareness as an ever evolving definition of health as well. So perhaps what I would say is my healthiest self in this moment wasn't the same as what that was 10 years ago.
Right.
Because as you learn more about yourself and you become more aware of the things that make you feel well and make you thrive, then I feel like that sort of shifts what healthy feels like, on the inside.
Yeah, I like that. And we change physiologically, psychologically, yeah, that's got to be a dynamic quality. Yeah, cool. So I want to talk about rest and restoration. And I'm coming at this from a place like, I said in my newsletter, like, I'm really tired. I'm really tired. And I assume that a lot of people are really tired. We've been through really a fairly traumatic last few years with the pandemic and everything else that's going on in our world, all the concerns we have. And yet, life keeps charging ahead. We have our jobs or our families or whatever is our areas of responsibility are. And so I want to start by just talking about how exhaustion and the absence of real rest affects us in all these levels of health and wellness.
Oh, that's a
big open question.
Right?
So let's start with physiological. Let's start with physical.
Yeah. So actually, if I could start with more of an Ayurvedic, the Ayurvedic approach to that, or the Ayurvedic answer to that, is that, and some of you may know this if you have any, if you've studied Ayurveda at all. Ayurveda is the Eastern form of medicine. It's a sister science to yoga. And with that, it's a very, it's rooted in nature. And so we have these strong connections to how we interact with our environment, whether that's the seasons or a cycle, like a day, a moon cycle, anything like that. So with this natural form of health, we also use different, natural forms of healing and concepts that maybe are a little different than we might see in Western medicine. And there's a really important concept that is called OJAS, which is OJAS. And this is an idea that suggests that we essentially have like a bank account in a way. It's like health reserves that give us our vitality and help us to stay healthy. It's sort of like our immunity, but the translation is not direct like that. So when we exhaust ourselves, we have exhausted not just how we feel in the moment, we've exhausted like the extra tank as well.
Right.
So the thought is that if you are at a place, let's say I lose one night of sleep, that will affect me the next day. If I have 2 nights that aren't great, now I'm affected more greatly. And that continues to accumulate and accumulate. So I might be able to recover from one of those without tapping into the tank if I am healthy and I am rested and I am nurtured. But it's when we reach that point of exhaustion that there's no more reserves. And that's when we have greater potential to have illnesses and imbalances of all varieties.
So the coaching training that I did is through the Functional Institute, through Functional Medicine Coaching Academy, and Functional Medicine has a similar, they talk about it like a threshold. So, so instead of sort of like you're depleting your reserves, like you're adding stressors. It's sort of a flip side of that same idea.
Yeah.
And so it goes to resilience, right? So, I mean, someone might be just fine, can handle being around people with the cold if they're also feeling pretty resilient, if their stress is, if their sleep is doing well and their nutrition as well, and they have an ability to withstand a certain number of stressors. But if they're under a lot of emotional stress, or they've been, training for a physical thing and they're not taking care of their rest and recovery, they're going to also be more susceptible to illness, to the burdens of those, that threshold. So I thought that was interesting. There's this.
It is. Yeah. And also when you say threshold and you used also the word exhaustion, I think exhaustion is like, we have now passed that threshold, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so feeling tired, like if you're tired and you rest, you tend to feel better. If you have reached a point of exhaustion, that rest now has to be extended. Like it's now like, okay, now you're in like a serious need of rest. It's more than just like sitting and
and I feel like the next level is like straight up burnout, where your gut doesn't work anymore. Like you've gotten yourself to such a state of depletion. So hopefully, we're not there. We hope that we have signals like, I think I put this in a newsletter, like I get an eye twitch and a cold sore. Like that's like my body's like, hello, you're pushing it, and I think you talked about self-awareness earlier. I mean, I think that's something that comes with life experience and self-awareness as well. It's like, what are those signals that we're moving into that, and that we need to pay more attention to rest?
Yeah. And not just what are the signals, like knowing the signals is one thing, but if I know what the signals are and I'm not taking any chance or moment to check in, to even recognize the signals, then it doesn't matter if I know what they are, right?
Right.
And sometimes that means that we have to schedule that. Like, okay, my check-in time is every Friday, like at the end of every week, like check-in time is Friday, recap the week. How am I doing?
How's
my body feel? How's my mind? Because it won't matter if you know what those signals are.
Right. If you don't,
we absolutely have the ability to override them.
More coffee. Or I mean, and I think we talked about this before, like I was even at a point where like I was kind of using exercise, not to an extreme, I'm not, but like looking to exercise to just, the endorphin rush, like let me get through this next thing, as opposed to really noticing the need for restoration. So one of the things that I remember, I think I read this in your book, you're talking about and you mentioned it before, like the role of nature and the role of rhythm and, natural rhythm and also ritual that we impose over that as well,
Mhm.
being really a good place to look for guidance when we're looking for managing our well-being and taking care of our needs for rest and restoration, and then maybe also looking and saying what's out of balance.
Yeah, for sure. So one concept that comes along with like the founding principles of Ayurveda is something called the macrocosm microcosm continuum,
Mm.
meaning that we are nature, nature is us, everything we do impacts nature, everything nature does impacts us, right? So we have this continuum of how everything affects everything. Everything is everything and everything affects everything.
Yeah.
And so first and foremost, if you look at nature, we're coming out of a season of rest, right?
Right.
Nature rests. It's winter and animals rest. Why don't we? So on a grand scale, like if you look at a seasonal scale, right there you have in front of you what would feel most natural in terms of when you're more active and when you're less active. And that's just on like a physical level. Because maybe that differs. Maybe when it's winter time, you're not as physically active, but you're doing things to stimulate mental activity. Because you're not outside, you're not, and keep in mind that we obviously have the ability to be outside, or we have the ability to do things because we have technology and we have electricity and whatnot. So thinking of
Warm
this,
clothes.
we have everything, but thinking of it as being stripped down to like when that didn't exist, what would we be doing in the
Right.
winter? We would be resting. At
Right.
the nighttime when it is dark, we would be resting, and when our days are shorter, we would be going to bed earlier because we don't have the daylight.
Right.
So when you think of those things, the macrocosm microcosm continuum, which is a mouthful, basically that we are a reflection of nature, and you take that reflection and go, what is nature doing? It's resting. And why is it resting? So that it can bloom. And why would we rest in the winter? So we can recharge our batteries, so that when it is actually nice outside, we have the energy stores to do the things that we need to do. And there are other reasons why these things happen and other components that go along with that. But in looking specifically and very simply at rest,
Mm-hmm.
and whether that's a seasonal rhythm or a daily, like a 24-hour rhythm, it's there if we're paying attention.
And it's not just physical rest. I
Right.
mean, like you mentioned, like we might not be as active in the winter because we just don't want to go outside and go for the walk that we usually go on or whatever it is, but we might still be revving up the engine mentally, or just getting ourselves in a state of other kinds of other states of depletion.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but you spoke to this earlier. Obviously, 21st century, for a long time now, we've had lights, we've had, all kinds of things that can allow us to extend our days, to work into the nights. And we do. I mean, so for a lot of reasons, that's deemed to be a good thing. So I'm not like down with lights,
Right.
but
They go away.
candles only.
Mhm.
Um,
I
but
actually do like that idea.
I have a candle right here.
Mhm.
But there's also these cultural expectations because of everything, right? I mean, there's a song or something, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Have you heard that phrase? And then there's a coffee shop, there's a coffee chain here in Minneapolis or in the Twin Cities area, where their motto is like, life's short, stay awake for it.
Mhm.
Which is, it's kind of fun, but
Mhm.
when we pour stimulant after stimulant, whether that's actually coffee or, stimulating ideas or like when we don't take a pause to rest, we have problems. And we talked about resting as a skill, and that rest is different from sleep and is different from relaxation. So I think, like, let's first just talk quickly about that, how rest is separate from like getting 8 hours of sleep a night, which is also important.
Mhm.
But yeah, would you speak to that for just a little bit?
Yeah, so this is the way I view this, and this is from an interpretation of all disciplines that I have studied, is that there are things that happen when we sleep, right? So whether that's a physiological function, your body's detoxifying, your liver is working a different way, like the different things happen, a different like cellular renewal. There are things that happen when we sleep. So sleep is not the same as rest. Rest is really more an opportunity to shut down stimuli, to not be doing. It's the idea of purely like being,
Mm,
and give us a chance to rebuild, to nurture, to restore, which also, of course, happens during sleep. But this idea of conscious rest is a little bit different, and conscious or relaxation, then to give the third answer, has more to do with the things that maybe are more playful or could be an activity,
mm.
um, but it's there's a little more doing involved. And I could see how, like, we can definitely argue all of those things, but when you look at it in those ways,
Yeah.
and you also look at the ways that we might be tired, that I think you would all agree that there's sleepy tired, like I can't stay awake. And then there's like, I'm physically tired. Like I just can't, I don't want to stand anymore. I need to sit down, or um, I can't exercise today because I'm too physically tired. Or mentally or emotionally tired, where I've got the physical energy, I feel awake, but like it's not happening. Like synapses are not firing,
Not
you know?
firing.
Yeah. And like, and when you consider that, of course, like all of like sleep, rest, relaxation, all of those things can help. But I think that we're more aligned with like, if I'm sleepy tired, I need sleep, right? If I'm, there's like, it's just a different type of tiredness or fatigue.
And you talked about like the chair in your office, like, like,
Oh,
and
yeah.
like bringing, well, so, I mean, I kind of want to shift the conversation to the skill of rest
Mhm.
and, how we might think, well, it's, it probably, I mean, it definitely looks different for different people, but I
Yes.
think some people might like sit back and scroll on their phone, think this is restful,
Mhm.
when the brain's still spinning, or the emotions around what they're seeing are still spinning. So you kind of talked about like just kind of sitting
Yeah.
and just doing nothing. And so I
Yeah.
love that visual of you.
Yeah. Because I think like what she's referring to is I have learned that really just sitting or lying down on the floor, like being on a hard, supportive floor on the ground, or even sitting on the ground, like something that may not be the actual earth, but the symbolic earth, can really give you this feeling of being held and supported, which is also really feeds into this idea of restoration. Um, and I'll use the word rebuilding again because I feel like those things have to be connected. Um, so I was saying in a previous conversation with Jill that I there's a chair that I just like to sit in, and it's by the window, and I just sit there. Like if I have a moment where maybe I have a responsibility, and I, instead of filling that time, I know that if I don't take a moment to rest, that all of the things that I'm doing throughout the day are going to accumulate to the point where I either mentally won't be able to handle it, or I physically won't be able to handle it. And so I like to sit there, and I also like to daydream, like to try to allow myself, I could use a word or the phrase zone out. I don't want to use that because I think that it sounds mindless, or unintentional, even like it doesn't have quite the depth behind it as like, to me, daydreaming is like, yes, it's whimsical, but it also, it's like your mind's ability to digest things.
Right.
It's like if you eat a meal and you don't exercise immediately because you haven't fully digested your food, it's sort of the same thing. Like if you're going, doing, and you're taking in, and you don't get that opportunity to just like pause, daydream, digest, process, integrate, then there's mental digestive issues as well.
and you've talked about like this is at your studio where you work, where you treat patients. And so you're talking about like moving from a state of energetic engagement with someone
Right.
physically as well as, and
Right.
energetically,
Right.
and taking an intentional stop.
Correct. And to be very clear about that, I'm with someone. Like if I am working, I am with someone, and I'm essentially playing a role as a problem solver, right? Like helping someone with something that's going on in their body, talking them through that. And to me, what could be worse than not having the ability to listen to them, to hear the things that they're saying that are important for me to help them, or for me to help them realize they can help themselves. And yeah, so and like as a chiropractor and someone that's doing a physical job, then that also adds another layer. Or if it's a private yoga session, then there is another layer, which is actually like it is very physical work.
Yeah.
And so in those moments between, I can't be on my email, and I have a lot of email. So it, like, from a time perspective, it would make sense. Like I'll use my best time management skills. And if I have a 10-minute pause, I'll reply to emails. And sometimes that might work or be necessary, but it actually makes more sense for me to just go, why don't I just be present for a moment and let whatever just happened in the last hour or so move through me and out of me, or whatever it needs to do, and to just feel like I've regained whatever energy I might have. The output is now coming back in.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we think about the things that we can do to allow ourselves to give ourselves the kind of intentional pause that actually brings restoration and rebuilding. And we can take this to the conversation that we have as well. And because I'd love to hear other people's perspectives, but let's kick this off a little bit. And I'm really drawn to the idea of ritual. And I know that's a big part of Ayurveda. So maybe let's start there, and then we can take this to the conversation and see what other people have.
Yeah. So in your question earlier about Ayurveda and nature, and you mentioned ritual in that question of how do we take these cues from nature and ritual and so forth. So rituals serve many purposes. And when I say ritual, I mean an activity that you can be very intentional with, that may be hygienic, right? Like it may be my morning ritual involves cleaning my tongue, like using a tongue cleaner, brushing my teeth, drinking a glass of water. Ritual doesn't have to be using crystals and essential oils. I mean, ritual has kind of a fancy sound to it, but to me, it's like, it's not a habit, because a habit means you don't have to think about it as much. Right. A ritual to me is that you're present within the moment of doing it, and that it has a greater purpose than just like cleaning your tongue, right?
Right.
And so if you connect this idea of ritual with nature, one thing that ritual does for us is it marks time, or it marks a moment. Even a celebratory ritual, like a holiday, like you just kind of know, right? You know what like the 4th of July feels like. Like I just had to pick kind of a random holiday. There's things that just have like a sense or a feeling to them.
Yeah.
And you can feel it. And so isn't it also true then that you kind of have to help your body understand? Because if we are going and going and going all the time, isn't it nice to know, or to give your body that cue that like, we're getting ready for bed. I'm oiling my feet, I'm washing my face, I'm brushing my teeth, I've shut things down, I'm taking deep breaths, maybe I'm writing, whatever it is. I truly believe that our body is saying like, hey, y'all, like shutting her down, like here it goes. And the same thing that like, if you eat at the same time every day, you get hungry at the same time every day. Like, I
Right.
just don't think that it's different. So if we can give ourselves these rituals, whether they're an Ayurvedic ritual, it's something that helps you pause to be more intentional with the moment, that it's not only like, it's not just the act of what you're doing itself that's really helping you,
Right.
because I'm assuming that it's a healthy act. It's also helping your body really understand that there's an ebb and flow. There is a rhythm. There's a, like, we're doing this and now we're doing this. And I should also add with that that I find really important, and this isn't necessarily a ritual, but rituals may play a role in this as well, that transitions are really important to recognize, because without recognizing a transition, and I'm guilty of this as well, and I just have like, and I think perhaps being guilty of it is what helps me understand it more,
Yeah.
is that when you go from one activity to another, to the next, without sort of stopping and going, we're doing this now, that it all builds, right? And if we're talking about the physiological piece of that, it's like my nervous system is stimulated, right? Now my sympathetic nervous system is stimulated, and my body thinks that I'm in sort of a survival mode, or it's doing its best to keep my vitals and just keep me going.
Right.
So when I take that transition, it helps me downshift and get into more of the side of the nervous system that we know, the sympathetic nervous system as freeze, fight, flight, and the parasympathetic as rest and digest, or I've also heard it called feed and breed. But those are different roles, right? So rest and digest is very different than freeze, fight, and flight. So the transitional pieces, I think, a transition could be you come home from work and before you walk in the door. So if you drive and you drive home from work, you stop in the garage, in your car, in your driveway, and just do like I'm home,
Yeah.
And I think one time that I think, we were talking about yoga and being a yoga teacher and a student. And at the end of a yoga class, you have shavasana, right?
Right.
And it's always like, after having that experience with shavasana for like some of the first times that I had it, I was like, why don't we do this with like exercise in general? Because if you think about it, and I'm not saying go lie down on the ground after a like 5-6 mile run, but that too is revving up your nervous system, right? So
Right.
why are we not taking a moment then to also just be like downshift?
And physically, I know that like professional athletes, or not just professional, but like serious athletes take
Mhm.
their rest and recovery seriously in terms of like, I'm going to do an ice bath or put my feet up or,
Right.
get however much sleep. But to your point, it's not I don't know, like it's different than Shavasana where you are actually dropping into a state of full being rest.
Right. Like, I think those things can happen
Oh, sure.
together.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But I'm saying
Yeah.
like, I just don't know. And I shouldn't be speaking for,
Yeah. Yeah.
professional athletes everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder though about that.
Yeah. I am not a professional athlete. I am barely an athlete. But I'll say that I am training for this long bike ride, and I have guidance, and that person who's helping me through is like in communication, which is just like a plan at this point. It's noted like, here are some things to recognize, like when you should not train, right?
Mhm.
And if that's the case, rest, and then defines rest, like what a rest day from that like training or workout is. And
So what is
sometimes,
it?
so it's like sometimes rest is nothing. Like sometimes rest is you take it easy and you go for a walk instead. Sometimes rest is like an actual easy bike ride. Sometimes rest is you don't do it,
Mhm.
and gives like the physiological things that like to check into, right? Like if you wake up, this is just one example of what this person has said, is if you wake up and your resting heart rate is far above what your normal resting heart rate would be in the morning, that is a good sign that you don't do it today.
Right.
And especially if you're getting that cue over and over and over again. So that's
Yeah.
a cue from someone who's in, like a fitness athlete world or realm, but we can use those things too. And maybe our things are different. Like if I wake up and I think I'm forgetful today, like I don't feel like I've got it together, then maybe that's my sign. Maybe that's
Right.
the sign that I don't do the extra things that
Do the
day.
extra thing, whether it's physical or otherwise. Okay, well, I think that is a good place for us to stop this part of the conversation. So I just want to thank you, Sarah, for helping me kick this conversation off.